There is a particular kind of person who handles a crisis without raising their voice, carries enormous pressure without mentioning it, and when you finally ask how they're doing, gives you the same answer they have always given. Fine. Not cold. Not indifferent. Something harder to name than either of those. Someone who learned very early that the world does not stop for your feelings, and quietly built themselves around that fact. That is Gen X. And their psychology runs deeper than most people realize. Gen X didn't become invisible by accident. They were trained to disappear. When you grow up learning that nobody's coming to save you, it doesn't just shape your lifestyle. It rewires your personality. Understanding why requires going back to one of the most iconic images of their childhood, a house key hanging from a string around a child's neck. In the 70s and 80s, American families quietly transformed. Divorce rates climbed, two-income households became the norm, and the resulting childcare gap created something new. Latchkey kids. Picture the scene. 3 in the afternoon. The school bus drops you off. You walk home alone. The house greets you with silence, no footsteps, no voice calling your name, no adult energy anywhere. Just the hum of the refrigerator. You make your own snack. You do your homework with the television on in the background. If you fall and scrape your knee, you rinse it and move on. If you feel scared, you swallow it. Psychologists call this benign neglect, not cruelty, but being physically safe while emotionally unsupervised. And that environment wires the brain in a very specific way. Help is not automatic. Comfort is not guaranteed. Attention must be earned or ignored. When you grow up feeling unseen, you don't just become independent. You become invisible on purpose. You learn to take up less space, to solve your own problems quietly. That coping strategy turns into a personality. It becomes an identity. The latchkey kid didn't stop needing love. They just stopped expecting it. Not spoiled, not broken, just trained from the beginning to disappear. This origin story explains something that confuses almost everyone who tries to read a Gen Xer from the outside. People assume they are emotionally cold. They are not. Gen X isn't cold. Gen X is compressed. They feel just as deeply as anyone else, sometimes deeper. Yet they were raised in a culture where feelings were treated like an inconvenience. Toughen up. Deal with it. You're being dramatic. So, Gen X developed emotional minimalism, not expressing much, not asking for much, at least not out loud. A Gen Xer doesn't say they're overwhelmed, they say they're fine. They don't say I miss you, they say you are still alive. And when they love you, they don't give you poetry. They fix your car. They show up when it matters. Acts of service became their love language because vulnerability never felt safe. Sarcasm, too, is misread. It isn't cruelty. It's emotional packaging, how they share pain without sounding weak, how they stay connected while keeping their guard up. The result: emotionally mature and still emotionally unavailable, supporting everyone around them while quietly neglecting themselves. The internal rule: never fully unlearned. Feel it privately, handle it alone, move on. And here is the central paradox of the Gen X psyche. The very trait that made them strong is also the trait that makes them lonely. When independence isn't a personality choice but a survival mechanism, the brain learns to scan for problems and solve them fast without noise, without asking permission, without emotional backup. Gen X became capable in that quiet, almost intimidating way. The person other people lean on when their own life falls apart. But at some point, self-reliance stops being a strength and becomes a wall. Gen X didn't learn I can do this. They learned I have to do this. That subtle difference rewires everything. It creates adults who feel uncomfortable receiving support even when they desperately need it. Adults who don't vent because venting feels useless. Adults who don't reach out not because they don't care but because some part of them still believes nobody will come. They are not alone in the loud, obvious way. They can have families, careers, and friends. But inside, there is often a quiet loneliness that comes from being the strong one for too long. Hyper-independence is a superpower. But if you never learn to be held, it can turn into a private kind of prison. Their inner child is still whispering, handle it, don't bother anyone. If this is landing, take a moment to drop a like. It helps more people find conversations like this. And if you appreciate psychology that goes deeper than the surface, subscribing is the best way to stay in. Beneath the emotional compression runs another layer, a finely tuned skepticism the outside world routinely mistakes for cynicism. Gen X didn't grow up in an era of institutional trust. They watched institutions crack in real time. Watergate taught them the president could lie. The Cold War taught them tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. The Challenger taught them even the future could fail suddenly, publicly, in front of everyone. And then came the 80s, glossy, loud, aggressively optimistic, while everything underneath felt unstable. Gen X became the first generation raised on relentless advertising, and their brains adapted. They developed a BS detector. People misunderstand the word, whatever. It doesn't mean I don't care. It means I'm not going to give my heart to something that's probably fake. That is emotional self-defense, keeping expectations low enough so disappointment cannot break you. They've seen too many promises collapse. The only language they truly believe in is authenticity. Not the polished version. The real one. Because to Gen X, the ugly truth is comforting, and the beautiful lie is dangerous. There is also a cognitive advantage embedded in their wiring that no generation before or after will fully share. Gen X was raised in two entirely different realities. Their childhood was analog, physical, slow, deep. They got lost without GPS and figured it out. They lived in a world where boredom existed, and boredom forced creativity. Their brains were wired for patience and real-world problem-solving. Then the digital revolution arrived. Personal computers, email, dial-up, flip phones, and Gen X didn't merely witness it. They adapted to it mid-stride, while still becoming adults. This makes Gen X psychologically bilingual. They can open a spreadsheet and reset a router, and still handle a problem the old way when technology fails. In any workplace, they become the translators, the glue between generations who can't read each other. They speak hierarchy and flexibility, professionalism, and memes. But the hidden cost is that Gen X never got to settle into either world. They had to keep updating, without pause. Helping parents log in while training younger colleagues on systems older than they are. Two realities. Two speeds. One nervous system. And that constant switching creates a quiet kind of exhaustion Gen X rarely admits. At work, this wiring produces a specific and recognizable pattern. Gen X is not the loudest generation in any room. But when something actually needs to get done, they are usually the ones doing it, improvising, solving problems quietly, cleaning up messes without applause. The generation of invisible labor, workhorses keeping systems running while everyone else argues about the system. They don't need motivation posters. They need fewer obstacles. And micromanagement doesn't just annoy them, it insults them. In their nervous system, control feels like distrust, and distrust feels personal. Their inner child hears it immediately. You think I can't handle it. So Gen X responds, the only way it knows. Not with dramatic rebellion, just quiet resistance. Do the work, avoid the politics, skip the meetings, protect autonomy like it's oxygen. For Gen X, independence isn't a preference. It's identity. The moment you start managing their every move, you are not managing a worker. You are triggering a survival instinct. Now look at where Gen X stands today. Psychologists call it the sandwich generation, caught between two heavy responsibilities simultaneously. On one side, aging parents with chronic illness, cognitive decline, and late-night calls that begin with something's wrong. On the other, their own children navigating brutal costs and a job market with no guarantees. And in the middle of it all, Gen X is still expected to show up to work like nothing is happening. They entered adulthood when pensions started disappearing. Retirement became your problem. They survived the dot-com crash. They absorbed the financial crisis in their prime earning years. Then the pandemic shook the ground again. The result is a kind of burnout that doesn't look like burnout. Gen X doesn't collapse dramatically. They just keep going, wake up early, help the kids, check on the parents, show up to meetings, fall asleep with their jaw clenched, do it again tomorrow. This is the clinical territory of high-functioning depression. You can be productive and still be depressed. You can be responsible and still be drowning. You can be the strong one and still be silently breaking. The latchkey kids who asked for nothing became the adults everyone asks everything from. They don't say, "I can't do this anymore." They say, "I'm fine." But something is shifting. As Gen X moves past the midpoint of life, something quietly powerful begins to happen. For decades, they lived in survival mode, handling everything, needing nothing, staying invisible just to keep the system running. Now, many are reaching a turning point, not a breakdown, a pivot, leaving high-paying jobs that stopped feeling real, creating things, simplifying, not out of impulse, but because they have finally arrived at a truth that took this long to surface. They played the game, and the prize wasn't worth the cost. What is emerging, slowly, and without fanfare, because Gen X does nothing with fanfare, is the understanding that independence doesn't mean isolation. That strength doesn't mean silence. That you are allowed to need help. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to choose yourself. The latchkey kid is still there, somewhere. Still self-sufficient, still skeptical, still quietly capable in ways most people will never fully see. But they are learning, perhaps for the first time, that the key hanging from the string around their neck was never meant to lock them out of their own life. It was meant to let them back in. Gen X grew up in a world between extremes, analog childhoods, early tech, and cultural shifts that shaped a quiet resilience. Which part of that experience still influences the way you think today? Share it in the comments so we can uncover what made this generation truly unique. If this video gave you new insights, hit subscribe to explore more of the hidden psychology behind the generations around us. Thank you for watching.